All right, everybody. It's 8:30, so we will get the show on the road. Good morning. Welcome, everybody, to the 2022 Conference Committee on Transfer and Articulation Conference. We're so happy that all of you are here to join us today. My name is Sam Bajak, and I will be serving as this year's MC. We are live via Zoom presenting the state of Missouri's only transfer conference. This is the second time that this conference has been presented virtually, and we're delighted that you and over 200 of your colleagues from all over the state of Missouri and the country are with us today. As we kick things off, here's the schedule for the day so that you have an idea of what you have ahead of you. We have a really good slate of events for all of you today. We'd like to know where you're joining us from, so please light up the chat box with your first interactive question. We'd love to hear what institution or organization you're from, and we'll see these questions come across in the chat. And here are a few reminders about how to get the most out of this virtual event. All participants should stay muted to eliminate background noise. We would love to see your faces. If you have a camera, please turn it on to better engage with us. All the presentations will be live, so bear with us on any technical issues. Chat will be monitored for questions throughout the presentations. If you enter a session and you decide that it isn't for you, please just close out of it and head to a different one like you would at an in-person conference. And please engage with us on social media throughout the day by using the hashtag COTA22. We've got such a great schedule planned for the day, and I hope that everyone here is able to take something substantive and meaningful away from their COTA experience. We have the honor of hearing from Commissioner Zora Mulligan as this event kicks off. Commissioner Mulligan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're very happy to hear from you.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everybody. I apologized earlier, but I wanted to let you know I'm working from home. And in spite of having done this for about 18 months, I can't figure out how to turn my camera on. I do fine if I'm working exclusively from home, fine exclusively from the office, but I struggle when I have to transition from back and forth, so I apologize. I also am sad I see a lot of CMO faces on the Zoom today. I was supposed to be at your institution later this afternoon with Governor Parson, as well as at Moberly Area Community College's Columbia location this morning, but had to cancel those because of bad weather. If you're in our part of the state, your driveway probably looks like mine, which is an ice chute. So I hope people are enjoying a little bit of a snow day, and I hope this is a good way to be productive on that time working from home. So again, I just want to thank everyone for the work that you do to make transfer and articulation easier among our public and private colleges and universities around the state. If you follow our department at all, you'll know that we have adopted a new strategic plan that articulates goals for educational attainment and workforce development in the state of Missouri. They look a lot like our old goals. It's interesting to kind of look at the data again and reaffirm that we need to be shooting for about 60% of working age Missourians to have a degree or certificate within the next 10 years or so. Transfer and articulation are an increasingly important part of that. Although I think we feel like we've done a lot of work and made a lot of progress, we know that it is increasingly the norm for students to take classes from several different institutions as they make progress toward receiving that degree or certificate that they need to thrive in today's workforce. So again, I'm just excited to see the topics that you all are going to address today, and really excited to continue to make progress. I think we have really emphasized adults here in the state of Missouri. And so it's given me an opportunity to talk with a lot of adult learners and to hear from them the frustrations and challenges they continue to face as they, again, try to just get over that finish line. We have an adult financial aid program called Fast Track, which is being reauthorized this year. It just cleared an important hurdle in the Senate last night. And so we're optimistic that that actually has a pretty good chance of getting done this year, and that will provide financial resources that your students need to be successful. Another of the things that we're doing as a result of the strategic plan is what's called an adult learner network. So the Office of Post-Secondary Policy, which is the team that you see before you from DUDE today, Office of Post-Secondary Policy is engaging people who work with adult learners across the state to identify the best practices, to find out what information can we provide that would help you do your job more effectively, and how can you learn from each other in terms of problem solving and information sharing. Part of the conversation about adults also involves, the reality that, processes are often not designed for adult learners. Even though we know that most of our students are adults, there certainly are a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds on campus, but there are a lot of 22, 23, 24-year-olds on campus as well. And so Mara Woody and the post-secondary policy team are going to be working with institutions to do some customer journey mapping or student journey mapping to take a look at, what do the processes look like for adults? If you're a person who shows up in one of our job centers and says, I'm interested in getting training, what are the obstacles that they face, and what are the ways that we make that process easier for them? So we've got a lot of work going on in the department that touches on the work that your transfer and articulation teams do at your institutions. But mostly I'll just reiterate, we're really, really grateful for the partnership with you and the institutions that you work at. We were daunted in the process of setting new goals for the strategic plan because the numbers are huge. We have made some small progress on educational attainment in the last 10 years, and each of those, tenths of a percentage point have been very, very hard won, but we still got a lot of ground to cover. And so there was a lot of debate, should we have a more realistic set of goals? Should we have numbers that, we think that we alone as a department can influence materially? And what we ended up deciding was it's important for the state of Missouri to know where it's heading, but we have to acknowledge that many actors and many factors influence our ability to achieve those goals. And that means, first and foremost, the people who are participating in this meeting today, just knowing that we have to continue to strive to serve students more effectively is critical to that endeavor. It also involves nonprofit organizations and others who work with students to provide support around the state. And so we're doing more to learn about those efforts and think about ways that we can all understand that we're working in a concerted way toward a common goal. So again, a lot of great work going on, a lot of great information sharing today. Sam, it hadn't occurred to me that we're the only conference in Missouri that focuses on transfer and articulation, but I'm proud to hold that role. And again, thank you for being with us today and good luck for great learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Commissioner Mulligan. We really appreciate it. We are also joined today by Dr. Mara Woody, Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Post-Secondary Policy, who will also be delivering an opening welcome for this conference as we get things kicked off in earnest. Dr. Woody, thank you so much for joining us. I'll cede the floor to you.
Great, thank you, Sam. I wish I had a camera problem this morning because I don't necessarily love being on camera, but here we are. And as everyone knows, there's a winter storm stretching across Missouri right now. And so I love the flexibility in seeing kids in the background, maybe hearing some dogs in the background. And I know I'm not the only one who's struggling with how this day is already turning out. So good morning, everybody.
Keep it up.
Good morning. It's another year. It's another virtual conference. But with the winter storm this year, it is good that this is virtual for multiple reasons. And so I appreciate so many people being able to attend. I know that another conference I'm attending today has been canceled. And so I was actually really kind of concerned about what was going to happen with this conference and if people would still be able to attend. And so seeing that we have this many people on board already this morning just speaks to the commitment that we have in higher education, even whenever the weather is trying to stop us. So despite the weather and despite the COVID, we have done a lot in this past year. And so I'd like to highlight just a couple of achievements, both through transfer and then with our department for everybody. And so the biggest transfer win that we have in Missouri right now was successfully updating the language on the Journey to College page about reverse transfer. And so what had happened was, even despite our best intentions, we haven't seen as many associate's degrees awarded via reverse transfer as we had hoped. And so the research we have demonstrates pretty clearly that student outreach and communication efforts have a measurable positive effect on degrees being awarded. And so this new language will streamline what is available to students. And so we're hoping that by doing a better job clarifying up front what students are agreeing to when they opt in to participate in reverse transfer, we are equipping students with the tools that they need to make informed decisions about what they do with their credits when they transfer. It's our hope that changes like this will make more students aware of reverse transfer as an option, and that we will end up awarding more students with the degrees that they have earned. So that's really the big highlight. And I want to send a shout out to COTA for that big accomplishment this year. Congratulations. So on a similar note at the department, we've also been a little bit busy. Along with what Zora mentioned, here are a couple of other things that we're doing right now to help serve our institutions. The first is we are convening a mental health task force to improve student mental health climate at post-secondary institutions. This is actually a partnership with us and the Missouri Department of Mental Health and also with Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So to see where we can partner to bridge the gap between mental health services provided in high school and the services available at post-secondary institutions. That task force actually just started meeting last month, I believe. They've had a couple of meetings so far this year. Again, with more partnership, we are also partnering with Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to communicate how career pathways can expand access and opportunities for career and technical education. This initiative will build relationships among high school counselors, career center staff, college administration staff, and other interested stakeholders. And again, because we know the pipeline, the educational pipeline is so important, we're also working with DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, on their early childcare initiatives to help with childcare shortages in the state of Missouri. A couple of institutions, hopefully some of you have seen that DESE has pushed out a grant application for institutions who are looking to expand or create childcare facilities. There's actually going to be around 2 of that grant that's going to get pushed out to institutions soon. So we'll send out more information shortly when we have it about that opportunity. We're also working with Department of Corrections to discuss and expand post-secondary education for justice-involved individuals. This is especially at a critical time because Pell expansion is set to take place in 2023. We also just discussed partnering and working more closely with our Workforce Development Office to really look at that holistically, that entire justice-involved system. So some of you already know this, but in the very beginning of COVID, we partnered with the Department of Social Services to bring social service workers to college campuses. We can proudly say this program is continuing and we are expanding. And so we have a goal this year to expand to 6 more institutions. And so if you're an institution who is interested in having a Department of Social Services presence on your campus, please reach out to Tracy Westmoreland here in our office, or you can reach out to me and I can connect you with Tracy. I'm hoping Tracy's on board and he'll plug his email into the chat. As Zora mentioned, we did also launch the Adult Learner Network Collaborative this year, and the collaborative is really the planning group for the Adult Learner Network. And what we want to do with this group is really connect higher education institutions, local workforce development boards, adult learner focused organizations, workforce development, to really partner and work together on how we can serve the needs of Missouri adults. So we're excited about where that's going to go this year. And we are also launching our first community of action this year to support institutional summer bridge programs. The Summer Bridge Community of Action will provide coaching, development, and technical assistance in creating or expanding summer bridge programs across the state. Both public and private institutions are eligible to apply and participate in this program. We actually just published the application for institutions and you can still apply. So the deadline to apply is Friday, March 25th. And so if you are interested in learning more about the Summer Bridge Community of Action that we're hosting, please reach out to Samantha Dickey. She will put her email in the chat for everybody. And so along with what Zora mentioned earlier and everything else that we're doing at the department, the common thread that I see in so far today is collaboration and partnership. We are stronger as a team when we're working towards a common goal, and we can accomplish so much more together than we can as individual groups or institutions. And so this is exactly what transfer is when you think about it. It's all of us working together to serve students and to serve all students. And so when we think about populations that may be served better by transfer, or there may be improvements we can make in the process for those students, that really involves all of us working together. And so we have done a great job of creating more seamless pathways for students through increased transfer. And there is so much more we're going to do. I have every confidence that everyone is still working very hard towards improving that even more and making it better than it is today. So in looking back, we've done a lot, especially with all the adversity we faced just in the past few years, COVID and everything else that has stemmed and brought up because of COVID. And I also know there is so much more on the horizon for us. The key to our students' success is us. And what I have seen is we continuously step up, we continuously answer the door, and we continuously work for our students in the state of Missouri. So I am honored to work in this community with all of you. I hope this year's COTA conference provides you with a lot of great information, gives you opportunities to build on those connections and those partnerships that are critical to success in today's world. I hope everyone stays safe from the snow and the weather and has a great rest of the day. Thank you. And I see there's some chat, comments in the chats. I'll check those and answer any questions that I see in there. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. I really think that we're getting the event off on the exact right note as we're moving throughout the day. Before I formally introduce you all to our keynote speaker for the morning, Dr. Toyia K. Younger, I'd like to cede the spotlight to Ross Hawkins, who is the current chair for the COTA committee. Ross will be providing the conference attendees with some committee updates, some committee recognitions, as well as some conference attendee recognitions. Ross, I'll cede the floor to you.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Sam. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. And I'm in my office here at Missouri State University in Springfield, and so far we just have rain here. But if you can see in the background, I have a calendar where it's a beach theme, and I don't know about you all, but I am ready for some warm weather, spring and summer. But again, good morning and welcome to this conference, the 2022 COTA Conference on Transfer and Articulation. The theme for the conference today is Transfer League, Ensuring Equity in Transfer. Again, I'm Ross Hawkins. I'm the current chair of COTA, and I'm the director of the Academic Advising and Transfer Center at Missouri State University. On behalf of the COTA committee, we are happy to have you joining us today. Regarding the theme of the conference, the COTA committee does work on behalf of all transfer students and higher education professionals. The committee is comprised of members from four-year public institutions, private institutions, community colleges, and proprietary schools. You can see on this slide and the following slide those individuals who are part of COTA, and we have different areas of expertise. Roger McMillan is the provost at Mineral Area College. Mary Beth Ottinger, Transfer Services Specialist at Harris-Stowe State University. Christy Seawall, Strategic Partnership Manager from WGU Missouri. Sue Bateman from the University of Missouri St. Louis. Helen Hale, the Director of Student Success and Retention at Crowder College. Caitlin Wilson is the Director of Academic Services at Moberly Area Community College. David Jones is a faculty member for Westminster College. Lacey Mathice is the Registrar as well as the Director of Institutional Research at the College of the Ozarks. Gavin O'Connor is our Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Ozarks Technical Community College. Brooke Lockhart, our previous chair of COTA, is the Assistant Director of Admissions for Transfer and Recruitment at SEMO, Southeast Missouri State University. And Roberto Koch from the University of Missouri Columbia is an Assistant Registrar. So hopefully, as you all know, this is a broad representation for transfer students and for transfer professionals in the state. And I hope also by going over the committee information that you perhaps now have someone that you can reach out to, that you can contact if you have a transfer initiative, if you have something that you can think of that we can try new or do better in the state. And absolutely reach out to me as well. I will continue to be the chair through the end of the fiscal year through June 30th, and I'm happy to listen and learn from you all what we can do to improve transfer processes. Today, right now in the Zoom room, we have 152 participants. We did have over 200 individuals register for this conference to learn more about transfer equity and advocacy. And although we do have very different roles at our home institutions, the one thing that we all care about is student success and specifically transfer student success. We're grateful to have individuals from the academic advising profession, those individuals from our Office of Admissions, registrar staff, research analysts, administrators, and transfer advocates joining us today to be a part of this conference. We have many attendees from public four-year institutions. We have strong representation from community colleges, as well as from private and proprietary schools. So regardless of your specific roles and where you are from, I'm convinced today you will have an opportunity to learn a great deal. Some of the initiatives the COTA committee has worked on are included on the slide you see now. As Dr. Woody mentioned, the Missouri Reverse Transfer remains an initiative to help more students get credentials. The committee wants to make this process as easy as possible for students, as well as us, higher education professionals. So we are in the final stages of creating a statement that can be added to admission applications to assist students with learning more about it on the front end. When everything is finalized, which is going to be hopefully very, very soon, there will be an email that will be sent out to admission and academic officers encouraging the use of that statement on admission applications. Something else that the committee is working on, we are discussing the AAT, the Associate of Arts and Teaching degree. We recognize that we need quality teachers in the state of Missouri and nationwide, and we have a shortage of teachers. So how can we utilize the AAT degree, and how can we encourage partnerships between institutions to make sure that we are doing the best that we can for those individuals that want to become a teacher here in our state? And as a reminder, last year we did update the transfer articulation guiding principles, as well as the transfer students' rights and responsibilities. And I encourage you, if you've not had the opportunity to review these documents, go to the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development website and review these documents. There's important language, important information for us as practitioners, as well as for the students that we have the opportunity to work with. And as I begin to wrap up my chair responsibilities, I am thrilled to announce that Caitlin Wilson from Moberly Area Community College will be the incoming chair for COTA. Again, Caitlin is the Director of Academic Services and has a lot of experience working with transfer students, specifically students transferring from a community college to a four-year institution. I'm excited to work with Caitlin. I look forward to working with her and others on the committee to continue our work and advocacy on behalf of transfer students. So again, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. I know that we are all being pulled in many different directions, have many things on our plates, and I think it says a lot that so many of us, 156 now, are here to talk about transfer students and to learn more about how we can better serve this population. I appreciate the opportunity to serve as chair. It's been an honor for me. And so again, thank you for being here. And Sam, I will turn it back over to you so you can introduce our keynote speaker.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for providing those remarks, Ross. I really want to stress that this conference and everything that we're putting on today, this would not be possible without the active involvement and contributions of the COTA committee. So I just want to express a heartfelt thank you to you all. If I can get my slides to advance. Before I introduce Dr. Younger, I just want to go through conference reminders one final time, virtual etiquette things for virtual conferences. Please stay muted to eliminate all background noise. We'd love to see your faces. If you have a camera, turn it on to better engage with us. These presentations are live. Hopefully we don't have any technical issues, but bear with us if we do. The chat will be monitored for questions throughout the presentations, and this applies more to when the breakouts begin. But if you enter a session and decide that it isn't for you, please just close out and head to a different session, just like you would at an in-person conference. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's Keynote speaker, Dr. Toyia K. Younger. Dr. Younger is the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs at Iowa State University. Dr. Younger formerly served as the Vice President for Leadership Development and Partnerships at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities from 2016 to 2020, where she provided the strategic leadership for the creation and delivery of programs that advance the mission and priorities of nearly 400 state colleges and universities across the United States. Dr. Younger also served as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs with Minnesota State Colleges and Universities from 2014 to 2016. Dr. Younger, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to hear what you have to share with us this morning.
Thank you so much. I'm joining you from Ames, Iowa, where it is a balmy 9 degrees this morning. I am always still adjusting to this whole virtual setting. I think it's absolutely hilarious. I remember we actually shut down my office on my birthday, March 12th, 2020. And so as my birthday is coming up, I always make sure that people go above and beyond, because I feel like COVID destroyed it for the past 2-3 years. So we're going to have a good time today. We're going to get past it. As Sam said, we're not going to have any technical difficulties, knock on wood. I am going to share my screen, which is the part that every speaker freaks out about, right? They get ready to share their screen and they're afraid that, they're going to share it and you're going to see a picture of my dog or something on the screen. But we're going to see how it goes today. Give me one moment to make this adjustment and we should be good to go. Share screen number 2. Voila. Can you all see my screen? I see a couple of head nods, so we are good to go. Awesome. Well, first and foremost, thank you for the introduction, Sam. I am so thrilled to be here to talk about something that I really, really enjoy, which is transfer students. And I'm sure some of you all are thinking, what the heck is this Senior Vice President for Student Affairs giving us a keynote about transfer? Like, what could she possibly know about transfer? Well, I always want to share that I actually started my career in higher ed at a community college. My first job post-master's degree was as Director of Student Activities at a community college in Maryland. And so during that role, I helped many students prepare for transfer. They were excited. I'm going to show my age. That was when they had paper applications and they would come and bring them to my office and we had to work it out and fill it out and do all that stuff. And so they were so excited about the opportunity to transfer. In particular, most of them wanted to transfer to our flagship university in the state of Maryland. And so they would transfer, they would get accepted to the schools. They were so excited. And then a semester or 2 later, I would look up and they'd be back in my office at the community college. And I was so confused as to why they were back. And so after speaking with some of them about why they chose to return, many of them identified challenges, but they were not always academic. And so I wanted to figure out what was happening at these institutions that were either potentially not making these students feel welcomed or that they chose not to stay. And so little did I know that, several years later, this would end up being the subject of my dissertation research. And so I'm going to delve into that a little bit later. But I came into this work in higher ed really wanting to help all students succeed. I soon learned that transfer students in particular seem to face additional hurdles that some of our non-transfer students didn't face. And so I wanted to identify what these hurdles actually were so that I could help alleviate them. And so that's how I kind of got involved in studying transfer students. And today, before we dive into the conversation, I want to challenge you to ask yourself the same question: why transfers? And then ask yourself, following these questions, what's my role? How do I play in this? And so let's go through these questions briefly. What is the one thing that you do well for transfer students? What is the thing that you can potentially improve for transfer students on your campus? What is the thing that you do not do for transfer students that you probably think you could be doing or that you should be doing? What office is identified as the place to go for transfer students? Not all campuses have a transfer center per se. And so who are the people and where are the offices that transfer students can go in order to get assistance? And then lastly, I want you to think about where you fit in that transfer landscape. as I mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs. And so I am putting out fires. I am dealing with crazy in the residence halls. I am doing all these things. But because of my passion, I've still figured out where I can fit in the transfer landscape. And so you may not necessarily have to be a transfer advisor to still play a role with transfer in your institution. And so I think all these questions are important to know, especially when you're doing this work, because we really want to effectively serve this particular population of students. So once again, why should we care about transfer? You know, I love this quote, and while it's somewhat old, about 10, 11 years, this is when we really started to have a more robust conversation about this work and what we could do to establish and advance the transfer agenda. And so the quote reads as follows: large institutions, especially public four-year universities, manage to admit community college students, even relatively large numbers of them. But the effort is sometimes lackluster, bow more to political pressure than a conscious decision to serve transfer students with the same level of commitment that they do for freshmen. And unfortunately, I think we've all been in experience where we've seen this to be true. You know, I remember working at one institution in particular, and the pressure came from local government because this large major research one university was located in a very culturally diverse county. But this predominantly white institution did not accept many transfers from the diverse community colleges that surrounded the campus. And it was only until city council and state legislators got involved that the institution began creating articulation agreements that were specific for students at these surrounding community colleges. And so I personally think, and this is just Toyia talking right now, we're going to be real. Are you guys ready for the real Toyia? This is just Toyia talking. I personally think that the primary reason that the four-year institution kind of went along with this was first for enrollment, of course. You know, they thought that this would be a way to increase their enrollment. And so we'll see kind of what happens. But they also thought that it could be a way to help bring more diverse students to the institution and help them check that proverbial box. Now, ironically, the plan backfired. The students who actually took advantage of this specialized program and these specialized articulation agreements ended up being low-income white students. And so the institution had to pivot and take some more intentional steps to attract more diverse transfer students. And so I'm always curious to see how people have to adjust and what their real motives are when they say that they're compelled or committed to doing work for transfer students. And so here at this conference today, why should we care? You know, this seems to be the great dilemma. And we all experience these dilemmas in our respective areas. First, there seems to be a conflict, if you will, between the institutional mission, changing demographics, and student populations. You know, it feels like we've been on a roller coaster for quite some time, especially when we start to examine enrollment trends. We hit all these peaks and the enrollment seems to be going up at certain institutions. Then we are constantly reminded about this enrollment cliff and how is this going to impact us? And the cliff is coming in 2025, and how are you going to brace yourself for it? And so there's this up and down, if you will, when you're thinking about not only your incoming students, but your transfer students as well. You know, 2020, I think, has made all of us kind of pause and re-examine the impact that even COVID has had on our institutions, that it's had on our enrollments, and how we reach and serve students. And this is both our incoming first-time full-time students and our transfer students. The next part of the dilemma is, hey, should we just focus on recruitment and admissions efforts only for students with associate degree? Now, the data shows that students who obtain the associate degree first and then transfer often perform or complete at higher rates their baccalaureate degree than those who transfer before completing the associate degree. So should we place an emphasis on those students instead? I'm not saying that at all, but I think that this question creates part of this dilemma that we struggle with during the conversation of transfer students. If we only support the transfer of what some may deem as the promising students or students who meet a certain criteria, will that make our institutional data look better? And I think that that's a dilemma. I think that's a question that several people across campuses tend to ask themselves. And then the last bullet really focuses on how do we track transfer student progress. And this is something that we have been trying to figure out for the past 20 years. And I don't even know if we've still effectively figured this out. You know, we were focused on iPads for so long. That was the Bible of institutional data. But then we automatically, realized that iPads was only reporting the first-time full-time students. So then you had other actors start coming into the scene. National Student Clearinghouse finally started exploring transfer rates. But then who was it getting credit to? Was it giving credit to the community college for helping them transfer? Or was it giving credit to the four-year institution who was receiving these informations? And another part that we also have to examine when we think about how we track transfer student progress is, do we do this locally? Do we do it statewide? Do we do it with our primary feeder institutions? And if so, how do we compare nationally? And so there's this ongoing dilemma on how we admit these students, how our institution responds to them. And I'm not quite sure, even after all these years of doing research in this area, if we've really understood and solved this dilemma per se. And so now that we understand parts of the dilemma, that we have to we have to question ourselves and look inward, particularly at the type of transfer culture that we have at our own respective institutions. And so I want us to take a minute to review and answer some of these questions, especially as you try to advance this work on your campus. And so first, do you know your transfer student climate? I know a lot of times we talk about campus climate, but I'm speaking specifically about what's the climate for transfer students on your campus? What is the position of your president or chancellor around transfer students? Do they even know or care about the work that's being done with this specific population? What is the position of other administrators and leaders on your campus about transfer students? What do your faculty think about transfer students? And where does the responsibility of transfer lie on your campus? Prior to coming to Iowa State, I worked at a national higher ed association in DC, and we represented over 400 state colleges and universities. And when I would ask this question, nobody could give me the same answer. Some folks said, oh, transfer is about admissions folks. Oh, transfer goes to the academic advising people. Oh, transfer is embedded in student success and they're going to do the services and programs for them. And so depending on your institution, transfer work and responsibility can be in a variety of places. And so I think it's important for you to ask yourself, where does this lie on my campus? I need to know where the work is really being done and how I can contribute to that work. I also think that it's so important that we understand who are our strongest allies for transfer. And sometimes you'd be surprised. It's not people who are doing the work on a day-to-day basis. Some of your allies can be faculty in the classroom. Some of your allies can be that random senior vice president who just so happens to have a background in transfer work. And so identifying those strong allies can really help you down the road. And then last of all, I think it's important that you identify who are your biggest challengers. Who are the people who, doesn't matter how great that presentation is, what you present, they always are going to kind of be that negative Nancy, and they're going to question, and is this really important? And should this be a priority? And so before you can start really doing this work, you really need to understand who those individuals are. And so I think it's so important that we get a sense of how people on our campus truly feel about transfer students so that we can develop a strategy on how to help these students and how to address the concerns that are related specifically to this population. So what do some of the most recent data tell us about transfer students? And in the context of our conversation today, I'm really speaking specifically about community college transfer students today. And so the data is showing us that up to 80% of community college students report that they aspire to earn a bachelor's degree. 31% of those students will in fact transfer to a four-year institution, but only 14% will actually graduate with a bachelor's degree within 6 years of starting college. And so while we know that successful transfer is critical to fostering social mobility, this data shows us that students who enter community college intending to get a bachelor's degree few actually rather end up doing this, and particularly within that 6-year time frame. And so this particular data comes from a very, very interesting report. I would encourage people to take a look at it. It's called the Tackling Transfer Project. It took place over several years from 2018 to 2021. And it was led by the Aspen Institute, HCM strategists, and SOVA. And this partnership really incorporated policy, practice, research, and some strategic communications across 3 different states: Minnesota, Texas, and Virginia. And so this advisory board really joined with some higher ed leaders on campus and with policymakers to make some clear recommendations for state transfer policy that leads to equitable transfer student outcomes. And we're going to come back to that conversation about equity. But they also developed some resources and tools to really help improve transfer student success at the state and at the institutional level. And so my topic today for our conversation really focuses on creating a transfer receptive culture on your campus. And so what does transfer receptive mean? A transfer receptive culture is an institutional commitment by a 4-year college or university to provide the support needed for students to transfer successfully. That is, to navigate the community college, to take the appropriate coursework, to apply, enroll, and successfully earn a baccalaureate degree in a timely manner. And so this concept of transfer receptive and being a transfer receptive campus was coined by a group of my dear friends and colleagues who are researchers and practitioners from UCLA Center for Community College Partnerships and a faculty member from Cal State University Northridge. They recently published a new book titled Power to the Transfer: Critical Race Theory and a Transfer Receptive Culture. And now I will pause because I recognize that CRT has become a very controversial topic across all states and across the country. But the one thing that I would suggest is that you actually really consider reading some of this work, because it's one of very few pieces that talk specifically about transfer students of color. And they use this equity lens as a backdrop to examine the factors that impact our transfer students of color. This book posits that U.S. community colleges serve nearly half of all students of color in higher education, who for a multitude of reasons do not continue their education by transferring to a university. For those students who do transfer, often the responsibility for the application process, the retention, the graduation, and the overall success is placed on them rather than on the respective institution. And so this work really aims to provide direction towards the development and maintenance of a transfer receptive culture, which is defined as an institutional commitment by a university specifically to support transfer students of color. And they continue saying transfer receptive culture explicitly acknowledge these external factors such as race and gender and sexual orientation in the vertical transfer process. And it unapologetically centers transfer as a form of creating equity in our higher education pipeline. And so it's actually really a good read, and I would implore folks to take a look at some of that research. And so while I will discuss shortly how we can create this type of culture using an equity lens, as they refer to, I want to really focus today on what it means and how we can create a transfer receptive culture. And so there are 2 elements of transfer receptive culture that include pre-transfer efforts. And those first are establishing the transfer of students, especially non-traditional, first generation, low income, and underrepresented students, as a high institutional priority that ensures stable accessibility, retention, and graduation. This must be a high institutional priority. I know those of us who are engaged in transfer research, it's a priority for us, but is it a priority for the institution? Is this even on their top 10 list of things that they are concerned about? And so these are some of the things that help create this culture. And it's important that you know where your institution fits in this and how they view a transfer on your campus. The second element says to provide outreach and resources that focus on the specific needs of transfer students while complementing the community college mission of transfer. And I highlight the specific needs of transfer students because I think what we've seen across time is that the needs of transfer students can be vastly different from the needs of our traditional students or those first-time, full-time freshmen who are coming to us directly from high school. The needs are different, not good, bad, but just different. And so how can we focus on the specific needs that our transfer students bring when they show up on our campus? The last three elements, which are more so focused on post-transfer, really include things like offering financial and academic support through opportunities for transfer students where they are stimulated to achieve at high academic levels. We know that particularly for some of our students who are transferring from community college, a major factor in this can be the finances. And so we have to be cognizant of how we can provide those financial reports or financial supports, the academic support that they need to be successful after they transfer. Number four, which I think is really important, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, is acknowledging the lived experiences that students bring and the intersectionality, keep that word in mind, the intersectionality between these individuals, their community, and their family. And lastly, we want to create an appropriate and organic framework from which we can assess, evaluate, and enhance transfer receptive programs and initiatives that can lead to future scholarship on transfer students. And as many of you know, if you attend various transfer conferences like the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students, I'm a member of the board. I felt horribly. I talked to Ross and was like, I'm gonna meet you in St. Louis. I'm gonna be there. And then I got sick and I was unable to attend. And so I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to meet some of you in person at that conference, but I love that conference and I've been committed to the work that they do because it's such a kind of hodgepodge of people coming together, similar to this conference. There's admissions folks, there's registrars, there's transfer counselors, but there's also graduate students and faculty members who are doing research in this area. And in order for us to make some strides in this area, I think it's imperative that we have future scholarship. The one thing that I have learned in my 20+ years career is that when you're really trying to make a point specifically to campus and university leaders, they want to see the data. They want to see the scholarship. And so for folks who are doing work in this area, I implore you to consider writing some of these things, writing reports, generating publications, because that's the way you really can get the attention of senior leadership. And I think it's so important to have that information so that it does help you enhance and assess and evaluate some of the things that you're doing on your respective campuses. And so, as I mentioned, there's a conversation that circulates around intersectionality. And most folks are saying, what the heck is intersectionality? Seems like a hot coined phrase that we're hearing more and more. And even as I mentioned in point number 4, it states that in order for people to create this transfer receptive culture, an institution must acknowledge the lived experiences that these students bring and the intersectionality. And so what is intersectionality? Well, intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person or a group of people or even a social problem as affected by a number of either discrimination or disadvantages. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexities of the challenges that they face. So using intersectionality as a framework, let's think about the overlapping identities that our transfer students possess. And you can kind of start typing some of those in the chat. We already know. We look at our transfer students. We recognize that many are transfer students of color. Some are veterans. Some are students with disabilities. Some come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Perhaps they went to an under-resourced school, and so they arrive on our campus with some learning deficits. And so they're showing up on campus with some of these multiple identities. And we haven't even got to the point of trying to help them attempt to navigate a very complex transfer process. So I think it's imperative that we think about who these students are and who they show up as on our campus, and always keeping that in the back of our mind as we try to serve these transfer students. Now, I mentioned in my topic that I wanted to have a conversation about viewing things from an equity lens. And while the terms equity and equality really sound alike, the implementation of one of these versus the other can really lead to some drastically different outcomes, specifically for marginalized students. And so equality means that each individual or group of people is given the exact same resources or opportunities. Whereas equity recognizes that each person has their own circumstances or identities that intersect, if you will. And how do we, in an effort to reach equity, allocate the exact resources that are and opportunities that are needed for those individuals to reach an equitable, equal outcome. And so as you see on this graphic, and I'm sure many of you have seen this graphic before, you've got the three individuals, and equality says, oh, they all want to watch this baseball game. So we're going to all give them the same size box so they can look over the fence and enjoy the game. And what we see is that they're all coming from different backgrounds, different groups. They have different characteristics. So even if we give them all the same thing, they may not all have the same experience or benefit. But when we look at the conversation from an equity lens, we recognize that they do all come and they do all bring something. And our job is to make sure that they have a equal experience. But for some, they might need 2 crates. They might need an extra crate so that they can sit over and look over into the baseball field. And so I think it's important that we keep this in the back of our mind, particularly for transfer students, that some of them are going to come to our campus and they're not going to be able to see over the wall. And so how do we allocate resources in a way that creates this equity framework so that we can effectively serve these students? And, it's challenging. It's challenging because we are in an environment where we say we're going to treat everybody equally. We're going to give everybody the same thing. But I don't think we spend enough time exploring and recognizing that this could look different for a variety of people, and especially those transfer students who show up on our campuses. And so using intersectionality as a backdrop, how does this change the way that we think about our transfer students? Well, we know that our transfer students consist of many intersectional identities. They are not a monolithic group. The American Association of Community Colleges found that 44% of students enrolled at community colleges are white, while the other 56% identify themselves as a student of color or a non-resident alien. We know that 29% of community college students are first-generation college students. We know that 5% of community college students on national data report themselves as being veterans. We know 20% of those students come to us with some form of disability. We know that 33% are Pell eligible. Additionally, further research in this area has really dug into conversations about transfer students of color. The work of Nunez and Elizondo says that in their attempts to transfer from 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions, community college students of color face hurdles that are distinct from their white counterparts. Additionally, they found that the research indicates a gross inequity and vertical transfer rates amongst students of color and white students. And so these are some of the things that really caused me to kind of want to dive in and explore transfer students of color in particular, and led me to my dissertation research. And so I just want to go over this briefly. My research was the case for degree completion, African-American transfer students at a traditionally white institution. And during that time, I had no idea that I would end up spending a significant amount of my personal time, my academic time really focused on this. But this was something that was really baffling to me. And I was trying to figure out how can I do this? How can I eliminate some of this? And so as I started my research, I found that many African-American college students do enter the community college with an intent to transfer. However, they were not transferring nor completing their baccalaureate degree as the same rates as their white counterparts. This data also confirmed that not only did white students complete their baccalaureate degrees faster than any other racial group, but over time, African-American transfer students had the lowest graduation rates. And so this data really made me think, well, come on, there's gotta be some successful students of color who are transferring. Who are they and why are they successful? What can we learn from those individuals? And so the purpose of my study was really to identify and understand those factors that contributed to the degree completion of these students. The three main research questions that I asked during this research were, what are African-American transfer students' perceptions of factors contributing to their degree completion? Do the factors identified in the literature as playing a role in the persistence of African-American students also hold true for African-American transfer students? And then how do African-American transfer students describe their transfer experience at a traditionally white institution? And so to answer the first question, I really looked at what are the factors that they identified, this is coming from them, that they identified as having contributed to their degree completion. And so the first was strong support networks. The individuals that I interviewed during my research talked about the support networks that included their family, their peers. And when they say their peers, they were talking about other transfer students who had come before them and who could kind of show them the ropes. They also talked about having support from people who were familiar with the college process. And what I always think is so interesting is that they identified the support that they received from advisors, both at the community college and the four-year institution. You know, sometimes when things happen, we like to point fingers and we say, oh, you know, we did everything we were supposed to do at the community college. And then they went over to the four-year university and I have no idea what they did. They didn't help the students. They didn't do what they were supposed to. But in this particular study, they identified receiving help on both ends. And I think that that's critical. We're going to talk about the importance of those cross collaborations between types of institutions. And I think this is much easier to accomplish when you're all in the same state. Another one of the things that these students talked about was their confidence in their ability to learn. They were all confident that they could do the work and that they were academically prepared at the community college. And this kind of went back to what I experienced working at that community college, because when they came back, I said, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh Lord, did we push them too hard? Did they go to that four-year university and then they failed or they flunked out and they didn't do well academically? And what I was finding is that those were not the major issues that were impacting them. Some of them actually did really well there, but there was something that was taking place at that campus that made them either not feel welcomed or not feel like that was the right place for them. Next, as I was interviewing students, a lot of them acknowledged the support they received from others, but they often talked about how they had to motivate themselves. They talked about friends who had dropped out of college and they didn't want to be seen as a failure. So they felt the need to prove that they could be successful in this new environment. They thought that people probably questioned how well they would perform since they were coming from a community college, but they recognized that they put some pressure on themselves because they felt the need to prove that they could actually do this, that they could actually be successful at a four-year institution. And then lastly, and one of the things that I found most impressive in this research is that many of them set clear educational goals. They search for the course availability. They dug deep to try and find out what classes are going to transfer and give me credits. They were proactive. They knew beforehand what was going to be necessary, and they worked backwards. And I know that that's some of the things that we are trying to really encourage students to do. But for those quote unquote successful students who transferred, that was major for them. They recognized that there was some onus on them, and they needed to educate themselves on what this process would look like. And then they set clear, attainable goals on how to reach them. Another thing that I really wanted to examine was looking at these traditional African-American students who came to the university as first-time, full-time freshmen, and kind of compare them to African-American transfer students. And so I had to look at the literature on African-American transfer students at PWIs. And based on what we know from the literature, we found out that there were many similarities between these African-American students and African-American transfer students. They both talked about the difficulty adjusting to this new environment, as well as some of the negative perceptions of campus climate. Now, interestingly enough, when I was doing my research, there had been numerous things that had occurred on that particular campus. There was a noose hanging from a tree outside of the student union. There were some campus climate challenges that were happening. And so my assumption was that that was going to be more devastating for them, or that was going to have the greater impact on them versus just them being a transfer student. And so, the students, what I found, and I thought this was so interesting, is that the students in this particular study believe that they face, and I'm speaking specifically to the transfer students, that they face some additional challenge, and this was because of their transfer status. Some of those additional challenges meant meeting and connecting with peers, both inside and outside of the classroom. They said how they weren't asked to be in certain study groups because they were in classes and the students knew each other already because they had taken classes together. So when they were entering into the scene, some as a sophomore or junior, a lot of the students in the class said, well, who are you? I've been taking classes with these folks all along. And then when they self-disclosed and said, actually, I just transferred here from XYZ college, they felt like people kind of looked at them a little differently and questioned, were they really academically prepared and what they brought to the table. And so one of the most intriguing findings of my entire research is that students actually said that they felt their transfer status actually trumped their racial status and their racial identity. They talked about feeling marginalized on campus because they were transfer students from a community college, not necessarily because they were a student of color. And they talked about things that we explore all the time in terms of a stigma behind transfer students. And while we as administrators and researchers and practitioners recognize that there is a stigma sometimes around these students, it was really interesting to know that the students themselves identified that stigma. They talked about how some people thought that they perhaps snuck in the door or at the back door, that they took an easier route to get into that institution because they transferred instead of applying outright to the institution. And what was even more interesting is that they felt like most of this stigma or most of these issues surface within the classroom. And so I think that's another reason that emphasizes while we're doing work in our various student services area, we've got to partner and do some work with faculty in this space as well, because there's definitely some things that are impacting our students. And a lot of that can be taking place in the classroom as well. And so lastly, I just wanted to explore the transfer experience of African-American students on this campus. And these were some of the things that they were very adamant that I took away from my research. The first was their desire to become more socially connected to the larger campus community. And they wanted to participate in activities, which we know is somewhat contrary to some of the transfer literature that's already out there that says, oh, transfer students just come to campus, they want to take their classes, they're only concerned about the academics. However, these successful students talked about how they wanted to participate, but they also talked about the challenges. the meetings are at a certain time and I work as I'm going to school. And so I can't make those events, or I still don't feel as though I necessarily fit in to this culture. And so I'm having a difficult time meeting new people and being accepted in this new environment. The second thing that they talked about with regards to their experience was the institutional reputation or context versus their individual experience. And I thought that this was very interesting as well. Many of them talked about how they were more focused on the institutional context than their own individual experience. They said things like, well, this school has a strong academic reputation, so it means a lot when you say that you have a degree from this institution. But they didn't necessarily talk about their individual experiences. And when they finally did open up about those experiences, there were some mixed. Some identified some good experiences and some identified some bad. And so I thought it was very interesting that for some of them, they just talked about the importance of getting a degree or the institutional reputation, and for them to proudly say, I transferred from XYZ community college and now I'm studying at such and such state university. Lastly, they talked about a sense of pride, and many referred to the institution where I was conducting my research as a good school. That's all. They kept on saying, well, this is a good school. And so they felt that their degree would be accepted and respected, which was really their ultimate goal. They wanted to obtain the degree and to be able to say, I have this document, I have this piece of paper from some place that is considered a good school. And so that really kind of summed up some of the experiences of our students and of our African-American transfer students. And I think that really helped open my eyes and change the way that I operated as a scholar practitioner on my campus, trying to address some of these unique challenges and opportunities that these students identified. And so now I want to go back to that equity image of the folks standing on the crates that we talked about. How do we keep that in mind when we're trying to create equity? And what types of steps can we take to create this transfer receptive culture using this equity lens? And specifically for students, kind of like the ones that I mentioned in my research. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it talked about providing outreach and resources that focus on the specific needs of transfer. Those of us who do this work recognize that there are different needs for our transfer students. And so we have to recognize this. It's not always going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And some of the things that we provide and the supports that we provide for transfer students may be completely different than what we may offer our first-time full-time freshmen. And so we have to be cognizant of that. Additionally, I always go back to this and I think about it, that we all, we can even take this outside of the transfer student conversation. We all have different lived experiences, and it influences the way we work, it influences the way we do our jobs, it influences the way we learn. And so keeping that in the back of our mind, I think is so critically important when we're thinking about our schools, that they bring these different identities and there's some intersectionality between all of that, the things that they bring. And so if we keep that in the back of our mind, how does that help us better serve these students? And so I know, I'm sure by now that you're thinking, okay, this sounds all well and good, Toyia, but how are we going to get there? Where do we even start? And so here are just a few ways for us to start the conversation about creating this transfer receptive culture on your campus. But I have to reiterate that we have to keep in mind that concept of equity in the back of our minds, so we can ensure that all of our transfer students, who they are when they show up on our doorstep, all the things that they come with, that they feel welcome, that they feel like they belong on our campus, that we have supports in place for them, that they know who their advocates are, and that they feel like the university actually wants them there and that they're important. And so some of the things that we've identified in terms of developing this transfer receptive campus is to identify the key office to lead the change. I'll be quite honest, and this has been a struggle for me. I've been at Iowa State for 18 months now, and this is by far the most decentralized campus I've ever worked on in my entire life. And so we've got 7 colleges and all of them are doing something different. And unfortunately, we don't communicate. And so there are some colleges who are doing great work in this transfer space and others, it's not even on the radar. And so how do you identify the key offices that lead change, but also how do you communicate and collaborate what's being done in effort to support these students? I always talk about the importance of meeting with the appropriate administrators. Sometimes people say, okay, I'm going to take this and go straight to the provost. Provost probably don't even know what's going on. He couldn't even tell you the transfer data. So sometimes you have to go to institutional research to get that data. Sometimes you have to talk to the people who are really those frontline workers who experience more than some of our upper level administrators, and meet with them and gather information as you're trying to develop strategies to help these students. Find your transfer allies. I think sometimes that's the easy part. We know who the key people are on the campus who get it. And so we connect with them so that we can work with them. I always argue and tell people present at department and divisional meetings. And somehow you got to weave it in. So yesterday we had the Division of Student Affairs met, and we were talking about, of course, some DEI efforts and what we were doing. And we had a student panel, and we talked about international students, and we talked about veteran students. And I had a third person who wanted to present. And I said, all right, this is your opportunity. Let's figure out how we can weave in a conversation about transfer students as well. That's a unique population that we have on here. And so look for those opportunities where you can do that. Arrange meetings with your presidents and chancellors. I know that this sounds daunting sometimes, but as you bring, the one thing that I have learned, and my former job before I even came to Iowa State, I worked at a presidential association. And so I worked with 400 college and university presidents across the country. What's the way to grab their attention? Data. You got to show them what the numbers are, but you also got to show them the financial impact about what happens if you don't do it right. And so those were some of the meetings that I would encourage people to have. And I know it's not hard, and it can be somewhat intimidating, oh my God, I'm just the academic advisor. Can I really call the president's office and schedule a meeting? But sometimes it's so important to have those conversations and share that information and data. And when the crap hits the fan, when you're in these enrollment challenges like we are now because of COVID and all these other factors, they'll stop and listen. You get the right one, they're going to stop and listen. And then one of the things that I found very helpful, and I did this when I worked at the Minnesota State System, which was comprised of community colleges, technical colleges, and state universities. I coordinated visits with the presidents and the chancellors and the leaders and said, you all have to communicate with each other. It's one thing if the community college is committed to this, but if the transfer or institution that we want to partner with, if they're not on board or if they don't have that information, you've got to set up conversations with those top level leaders so that they can visit with one another and decide what's the right path, how do we move forward. And I think that all of these things are so important, and just the one, a few steps moving in the right direction of trying to create this receptive culture on your campus. Additionally, I always talk about participating on policy committees. Now, this is not my cup of tea. Sometimes you get in these conversations and they consist of people who serve on faculty senate committees, and the devil is in the details, and they get into all these policies. And that's great. And sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not. And so I think it's important that people who do transfer work participate on these policies, so that when people create policies, you can speak up and say, that might work for a traditional age student, or that might work for a first-time freshman, but that approach may not necessarily work for other students. And so being cognizant of that is so very important. At a previous institution, we created a cross-campus transfer advisory board. There were individuals across campus who were doing the work, but weren't necessarily communicating. And so we started setting up a monthly meeting with this board to examine some of the challenges.
I'm gonna get my plugs. You're not, I'm just worried about you hearing me.
I love technology. I wasn't expecting a conversation. I was expecting a dog barking or something, but we're okay. We're going to keep on going. I also talk about inviting presidents and administrators to attend transfer student celebrations. They need to see that these students are enjoying their time here. They want to see, they need to see the impact that it's having. And so sometimes we don't invite them. We think, oh, they may not come. I'm just going to invite a couple of people. But you'd be surprised who might show up. And just them meeting and having conversations with those students can be so imperative. We've also developed some faculty discipline dialogues. That's always a conversation that we get into, particularly as we examine articulation agreements. Does the syllabus at such and such community college and the learning objectives that are established there match what we're doing at the four-year institution? And so how do we make sure that those faculty members are effectively communicating with each other? How do we develop strong partnerships on and off campus? There are external folks who can really help play a role in these conversations. And so I don't want to forget them and only be looking inward, but looking externally at people who also are interested in our transfer population. And last but not least, conduct the research and publish. When I started doing this work, probably really and got really deep into studying transfer students, it was hard. There was not a lot of dedicated research in this area. Thankfully, over the past 15 years, we've seen more and more people who are doing work, who are publishing, who are conducting research, and that research helps inform our practice. And so while I know we're all busy, myself included, it's been a minute since I've been able to pull off a transfer publication, but it's so critical. And I've learned this time and time again. They may not read the whole report, but if you've got a document or a publication, pass that on, pass that executive summary on, because that is the way that you can grasp people's attention. That's the way that they can see the immediate data of what's happening on your campus. And all of those things can help contribute to what we call this transfer receptive campus. And so I'm going to end there. I wanted to share my contact information. I know we have a breakout session, so if folks want to, if we don't have enough time to answer questions now, but people want to join in and answer more questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain those questions now. I am so grateful for this opportunity. It gets me back in my transfer lane. You know, for the past 18 months, I have been busy trying to fight COVID, trying to find isolation houses, trying to make sure we have enough tests, dealing with a shortage of counselors, all these other things that are taking place. But I get my passion and my joy when I get to dive into the research on something that I feel so passionately about. And so I am excited and grateful that you all invited me to be here today to share my experiences in this world, but also to learn. And so I want to hang out a little bit. I'm crashing the party, Sam. I don't know if that was an option or not, but I always love to be part of other conversations that are dealing with transfer. And so I missed the in-person conference, but I think some of you know NISTS will start their virtual conference next week. So you're going to see my face pop up on the screen there. But I wish you all the best. I think it's important that we get groups together like this to have conversations in this area. Sometimes we have these feelings where we think that our work is not valued or as important, and it is critical. And I just want to be here to encourage you, to thank you for the work that you do, and to let you know that it's not in vain. I know sometimes you don't always feel like you get the thanks and the credit and the accolades, but the work you all are doing is so critical to our student success. And I'm just thankful to be able to be a part of this conversation today. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Younger. This was a wonderful presentation. I speak for myself and the committee, and I think everybody here that we really took a lot from your presentation. This was just so wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. I believe we're coming up a little close on time. I want to squeeze a question or two in before I formally dismiss for breakout sessions, and we'll have more opportunities to ask questions in those. Scrolling back up through the chat. so I can get back to the first one. Is there any research on students and the transfer student experience as it pertains to historically Black colleges and universities?
We're just now starting to see that, which I think is interesting. When we think of partnerships, a lot of times, particularly with historically Black colleges, the partnerships have been with predominantly white institutions and not necessarily community colleges. And so I'm so excited that we're starting to see that. Before I moved to Iowa, I lived in the DC metro area. And the president at Morgan State University, which is a historically Black college outside of Maryland, has really been intentional in reaching out to his colleagues at the Community College of Baltimore County, at Baltimore City College. And, you know, as you can imagine, they have seen the enrollment roll up. These were people who didn't necessarily think that a four-year institution was an option. And they really weren't sure that a historically Black institution would be receptive of their credits. There's so many pieces that we know that falls into this. And so I'm excited to see that there are some people who are starting to do some research in this area and do some practical things. And sometimes it's not always just from the transfers perspective. Here at Iowa State University, everyone knows that our bread and butter is agriculture. But we want our students to have a diverse experience. And so we're partnering now with some HBCUs, Tuskegee and Prairie View, that put a lot of emphasis on there. And so we've actually experienced some horizontal transfer with people who are at historically colleges who said, I want to come over here and check out what you're doing at Iowa State. And so I think there's opportunities, more opportunities than there's been in the past. But I think that for a long time, historically Black colleges and universities weren't really in these conversations and weren't really thinking about the important role that they could play in bringing them into their institution.
All right. I think we've got time for one more. When considering swirling students, how can higher institutions of higher education collaborate to better support this population, specifically with equity?
Well, you know, and that's the hard part. You know, we spent so many years having conversations about vertical transfer. It was always about how do we get students from community colleges to four-year institutions. And now we are seeing so much activity. It's like, oh my gosh, how do we make sure we do this correct? And unfortunately, I don't think that there's a silver bullet, but I think that's why it's imperative to have the conversations. If you're looking, sometimes these swirlers are going to similar types of institutions. And so I think that that's why it's important that we have conversations with our colleagues across the state. If we can start tracking the data better and recognizing where they're going and why. Some of this may be related to a major. They started off at one school and then they realized that they thought they were going to come in and be a chemistry major, or myself, I was going to go into nursing, and then I realized I don't even like blood. I don't know how I'm going to go be a nurse. And so then I thought about changing to something else. And so I think that digging deeper into the data, finding out where these swirlers are going, where their majors are, I think there's an opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper and find some more information about where exactly they're going, and then connect with those various folks who are doing this work at those institutions and try and establish those relationships to help students who are just out there. I have, you know, I take this very personal. I have three, as I call them, knucklehead nephews who all three of them, I sat down and I said, this is what you should do. And they all looked at me like, I don't know about that. And I wanted to shake them and say, I got a PhD in this stuff. I know what I'm talking about. Only one of them listened to me. The other two are now in their 30s talking about, oh, Auntie Toyia, I'm thinking about going back to school now. And I'm getting so frustrated because sometimes we were like, I'm trying to help you. I really, really am. And my heart breaks because they've been all over the place and they've got all sorts of student loan debt and nothing to show for it. And so that's why I take this work so personally, is because ultimately I do want these students to be successful. I do want them to obtain a degree, and I want them to better their lives. We know what the data says about those individuals and the salaries they make and all the things they do when they have that baccalaureate degree. And so I support social mobility in all shapes and forms. And I think it's important that we get a little bit more deeper into these conversations. and understand how the roles, important roles that we all play can really impact that for our students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us this morning, Dr. Younger. We all really, really appreciate it. And I felt like I got a lot out of what you had to share. I just want to give everyone a brief update on how the morning is going to go. So we're going to dismiss you all briefly. The schedule for the breakout sessions is as they're listed on the slides. We've got 3 from 10 to 10:45, 3 more from 11 to 11:45, and then a brief closing session at noon, where we'll be doing some brief committee and conference attendee acknowledgements, and talking a little bit about next steps after the survey. So yeah, I am going to close out the session. All the Zoom links to access these breakout sessions are on the COTA conference webpage. So the same landing page that you took to get to this one, all the sessions will have the Zoom links embedded in them. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and we will see you all in your breakout sessions.